So we're going to start that recording now. And truthfully, it's a great exercise because we get to present on items that here at Circulate we do every single day, but we don't really get the opportunity to speak one-on-one to a specific topic all the time. So excited to have that opportunity. We will be sharing these slides as well as the recording of this presentation on our YouTube channel. So if you ever want to visit it or share it, please feel free to do so. The presentation will be approximately 30 minutes, and we will definitely save time for questions. So if you think of anything along the way of the presentation, we do ask that you stay muted during the presentation, but pending the size of our group that we get to, we will have a Q&A following, and we'll be able to answer anything that you'd like to chat about older adults or anything else that you heard here today. So with that, truthfully, thank you for being here. And again, my name is Jane, and I will be your key presenter today, but I do want to do a shout out to others on the phone. So at Circulate, we kind of a two-branch organization where we have a fantastic policy team as well as a team of amazing planners that I'm a part of. And so I'm joined today by Angelica and Octavio, who are two of the other planners on our team. And we do these presentations all together. So you will be hearing from pretty much all of us throughout this series. And I also want to chime in. You'll notice the logos at the bottom of this slide. This is made possible by a grant through the County of San Diego, as well as the Office of Traffic Safety. They have been terrific to work with, and we're able to provide presentations and programs to people of all ages throughout the county when it comes to mobility. So excited to be here. With that, let's go ahead and dive in and start talking about older adults and safety tips. So the purpose of today's presentation is that we don't always feel safe walking or biking in our community. So we want to kind of dive into why that is and how we can identify where those safety concerns exist. We also want to look into what types of improvements could be made in order to enhance our safety when it comes to walking and biking. So here's kind of a quick snapshot of what we'll be covering during this lunch hour today. We want to go over what is a walkable and bikeable community? What are we striving for? Because if your current situation isn't making you feel the most safe, what are features that would make you feel more comfortable or even willing to get out and walk and bike versus getting into your vehicle? So with that, how does your environment impact your safety? Oftentimes it's the infrastructure around us or the environment that we're interacting with that is really impacting how we feel. But other times it's how do you impact your safety? How do you prepare when you go out to bike or to walk? What are you wearing? Do you have a flashlight if you're walking in the night? So we'll kind of go over that. And then how we as a community, how can we improve safety together so that everyone has the most enjoyable and safe experience possible. So starting us off, I just want to do a quick recap on what makes a walkable and bikeable community. So a walkable and bikeable community is a community that helps you stay active and healthy. A great benefit of getting out and about is that it's physically engaging. You get to exercise as well as socialize, stay healthy, and for when we're looking at older adults and those who face mobility challenges, generally you can stay more mobile and active if you start doing and working on that now. And so it's really, there's terrific benefits in that way. It also helps you stay mobile and independent. We do know as we age, sometimes our independence is impacted, whether we lose our driver's license or maybe our mobility, personal mobility changes. And so when we look at what mobility options we have, and we do assess that we have a variety of options, that enables us to be able to preserve our independence as long as possible and enjoy our day-to-day activities that really kind of bring us the most enjoyment. Having a walkable and bikeable community also helps us stay connected. So I'm sure many of us on the call, if you're out walking or biking, you see your neighbors more often, you're able to look people in the eye, maybe you're able to say hi to your postal worker. So you're just able to have more interaction. We also learn that generally people like to go on walks with their family member or a friend. And so it can be more social and active in that way as well. And then a big benefit that sometimes we don't think about is that having a walkable and bikeable community that has more people out on the sidewalks, there's more eyes on the street. And so that does help prevent crime and improve safety. If we want our environments to be safe and comfortable to walk around, that also comes with understanding that um, occasionally there are bad things happening in our neighborhoods, and so we need to be paying closer attention to that, and just by virtue of being out and seeing what's going on helps decrease that activity. Bad activity doesn't want to be where people are walking and biking. So kind of diving into how our environment impacts our safety, there are 6 categories that I like to group this into, and when we talk about this, we talk about it in terms of these are environmental impacts. So things that when we're experiencing our environment, whether that is walking or biking or even using transit, what are things that impact your experience? And so I hope as we go through some of these slides, you can kind of think of some personal experiences that you've had that maybe made you feel uncomfortable, and we can start kind of getting at where improvements can be made. So the first thing we want to look at are sidewalks and walkways, and there's different environments that these can exist, obviously. So the first one we want to look at is a residential area. So pretend this is your neighborhood and you're walking down the street. We would like to see what are some things that are working well, that you like about this pedestrian environment. Few things that come to mind is that there's a buffer zone from traffic. So when you're walking on this sidewalk, you're not walking right next to the street. There's some room between you and moving traffic. There's also a throughway for pedestrians that's well maintained, it's clear, it looks like it's fairly free of cracks or uneven surfaces. And so that kind of provides that comfort there that you don't have to worry about tripping hazards or feeling crammed on the sidewalk if someone else were to walk past you. Looking at the frontage zone, so this is next to the property. Oftentimes, a sidewalk is next to a private property or a property that someone else owns and is needing to maintain. And so it's good to be aware of, is there any features of this frontage zone that is impeding into the sidewalk area or maybe brings you concern? What I often hear is that when people are walking, there might be large bushes that are coming into the sidewalk area. So that could provide a tripping hazard. It also, oftentimes we can't see what's past the bush. And so we don't know what to expect if someone's walking out of their house and maybe they would run into you because they can't see you. And so having that clear frontage zone provides that level of safety and just being aware of what's happening in your on your walk or on your bike ride. And then the last thing that I'll add is you might be in an area where there's a bus stop or a way for people to kind of hop into their cars. So having an opportunity for people to get out of this through way on the sidewalk and kind of just giving space for everybody. That's definitely a big thing that we like to pay attention to when we're looking at kind of the most comfortable environment to walk in. A different environment type is looking at a commercial area. So this could be anywhere in San Diego. It could be from North Park to La Mesa, anywhere that has shops and stores. So kind of in your mind, maybe think of something that comes to mind. But in this situation, what are some things that maybe look promising or positive for a pedestrian? So in this situation, there are a lot of things happening on the sidewalk. There are trees, there are signs, there are mailbox, but pretty much it leaves a really clear buffer zone. So this use can be a shared space while still allowing for pedestrians to freely walk without any obstructions. And so that goes into this thoroughfare. It's well maintained. This liquor store or whatever you want it to be, maybe it's a wine shop, it does look like it has like outdoor seating, but even the seating is outside of the sidewalk area. I know we're finding that more and more with COVID, with more outdoor dining, that sometimes it encroaches into the sidewalk area, which makes our experience as a pedestrian or bicyclist a bit less comfortable. So something to be aware of. And then the other thing with this restaurant is we're able to see through the windows. And so that visibility of what's happening on the inside versus what's happening on the exterior is nice, because if these windows were heavily tinted, it just kind of brings up a level of uncomfort because you don't know what's happening on the inside. So it's not always fun or safe or comfortable to walk in front of. A few things that I want to bring up that maybe would cause concern is also paying attention to the business type. Sometimes when I provide this presentation, it comes up that not all business types are comfortable to walk by. And so when you're out and about moving in your community, it is good to take note of what businesses maybe you don't feel as comfortable walking in front of, and maybe there's a better route to take. Also in this example, we notice that there's no curb ramp. And so when it comes to someone rolling, whether it's a wheelchair or someone pushing a stroller, it's really challenging to get down to that street level. One thing that isn't pointed out in this image that I've also heard is if you were to cross the street, kind of near the mailbox, you have to get pretty far out in front of this truck that's parked in order for a vehicle to see you. So there's a lot of things to think about when you are in this zone, that your environment can either make you feel more safe or less safe. One thing I want to bring up is some of us live in the county area, so there isn't a more traditional sidewalk space, or maybe it's less of a commercial zone. So a few things to point out that are positive for pedestrians and bicyclists are good lighting, a maintained level surface, even if it's on a concrete base like a sidewalk, it can be a gravel base, but still have a nice maintained surface. Having that buffer space between vehicles for both bicyclists and for pedestrians, and then the existence of a bike lane, especially in an area that is adjacent to high-speed traffic. And that brings us into thinking about bike lanes as kind of this adjacent feature to sidewalks or pathways. So there are different types of bicycle facilities, and for folks of all ages and abilities, it's good to think about what infrastructure type when it comes to bicycles does provide the safest experience, and what can we do to make sure that we provide that to those needs. And so here's just a glimpse of just some of the different types of bicycle facilities. We're seeing more and more of the separated or multi-use trail, which is fantastic. But something to make note of is if you're a bicyclist and you love riding along a certain street, but you don't always feel safe because of whatever the factor is, you can kind of come back and evaluate perhaps there's a better situation for bicyclists, and what are ways that I can get involved in of that conversation to make my community a more comfortable place to walk. And that also chimes true for the different levels of bicyclists when it comes to the most confident to maybe those who are learning or younger, or just is maybe more of a recreational rider versus a more serious rider. And so that difference in comfort level also helps us decide what type of bicycle infrastructure is best. And so for older adults, perhaps you're a super serious, comfortable bicycle rider, but also maybe it's on the side of wanting more separation to make us as comfortable as possible. So the last thing I'll add is when we look at sidewalks and bicycle facilities, everything is kind of the same here, where we want to make sure that we're looking for even, unbroken surfaces, having enough room for everybody to walk, and then looking at that frontage and is it well maintained and kept up. So sidewalks oftentimes lead into crosswalks, and so this is another part of our environment that we like to pay attention to. And what's the level of safety here? So curb ramps are certainly a big aspect of that, as well as looking at that even, unbroken surface. So we'll kind of look at crosswalks here for a second. This image in front of you is pretty common. You'll notice that they have the detectable warnings, but another thing that you'll notice is how large this crossing is. The distance that someone has to cross can certainly make us feel uncomfortable. You're so vulnerable in front of a large intersection with a lot of cars zooming nearby. And then the other thing to think about is some of us are slower moving. And so crossing a large intersection like this, there's the anxiety behind it of, can I make it in time? What happens if I only make it halfway and the light changes? And so a note here is that as we're out enjoying our walking environment, even though I wish every street situation was accommodating for pedestrians and bicyclists, it is really important to take note of where intersections like this exist in your community, and perhaps you need to defer to a different crossing situation for your safety and hopefully your enjoyment as well. One thing to note on these large intersections, as well as everyone else, is the type of signal crossing that there is. So we'll kind of touch into the different types here because it's a big item to look at. What are the pedestrian facilities at these large intersections that maybe help us feel a bit more comfortable? So key factors here are the type of the time signal crossings. And so what we see as the signals, as well as, again, the detectable warnings. And I don't know if everyone knows the purpose of these guys, but even though for some, they add traction and it's nice to have that as an element, it is for those who have seen impairments. And so they're able to detect when they're moving from an area where vehicles exist to an area that is for pedestrians. And so there is a lot of value in helping folks of all ability types understand what environments they're in. So kind of touching into the time signal crossings, the way that they're timed is based on there's science involved, but understanding that how long it takes to cross the street for one person might not be the best option for those who are older or perhaps a young child or again someone kind of pushing a stroller. And so we can retime how long these intersections allow for pedestrians to cross. And that's a really great thing to take note of, that there is that ability. Again, when you're out walking, because maybe there's an intersection that you think is just extremely short for pedestrians to make in time. And so that's something that you can relay to your city, your jurisdiction, and make a note because that is something that can be adjusted. Similarly, the signal timing systems can also be improved. So traditionally, we would see the flashing hand that goes to the walking symbol, and that tells us how, when it's safe for a pedestrian to cross. But more and more, we're seeing the countdown timers that also can include the audible feature that tells you how much time you have left to cross. And so again, it's your homework as kind of this vulnerable user out in the environment, as a walker, to kind of take note of where these features exist, because if you are able to use an intersection with the countdown timers or the audible timers, it just shows that there's so much more attention given to the pedestrian in that space. So another environmental impact or feature we're looking at is lighting. Whether you know this or not, lighting comes in many shapes or sizes, and it can be designed specifically for pedestrians and bicyclists versus large overhead lighting for an entire street area. So what this image shows is that the image on the right, as well as the lower left, is more of the pedestrian scale lighting that is geared for those walking on a sidewalk or perhaps in the bike lane. And it's not the large overarching that's specific for vehicles. And then the image in the upper left, what you're seeing there is there may be lighting available, but the maintenance that allows for the lighting to actually illuminate an area may not be there. And so that impacts our safety and comfort because the lighting isn't actually illuminating the area that we're using. So in an area like San Diego, where weather's nice, we're able to enjoy evening walks or bike rides. It's good to know where lighting exists and also where it's maintained, and maybe start taking note of where lighting is carefully designed for the pedestrian in mind. This is just a fun little example of understanding that lighting also comes with visibility. So visibility meaning that you might be 5 minutes away from walking to a cafe, and the image on the left may be a 2-minute walk to get to the cafe, where the image on the right may be 5 minutes. And so this kind of example just shows us that even if it saves you a bit of time, it's good to think of the safety and comfort of yourself in mind. So the image on the left, there's very little visibility. It's hard to say what these buildings, what's happening behind those walls. Maybe it's residential and people could be looking out their window, but maybe not. Who's to say if this lighting works? It feels very constrained, not very comfortable. So it might be quicker, but no one can really see you in that area. Whereas the image on the right indicates there's a lot of street activity. The sidewalks are very wide. There's great visibility between businesses and you using the pathways. And so that just adds to the comfort and the safety of your use, because there are eyes on the street. Again, back to kind of that thinking of reducing crime, that it's a more community oriented atmosphere. So touching a bit more on infrastructure problems, these are pretty common occurrences that we see, but understanding that even though they're common, they're really uncomfortable and dangerous for the users in these areas. So the upper left that we're seeing is there's a woman pushing a stroller, and a gentleman he's in the street in a wheelchair. But what this is showing is the sidewalks are extremely narrow. There's signage in the way of the sidewalks. We see this throughout San Diego. And so a few things to take note here is understanding the width of a sidewalk, and is there enough space for all users. We never want to see anyone walking in the street. The lower left is looking at crossings. So this is near a school area. There's a crossing on one side and not the other. So trying to always select areas that have attention given to where the pedestrian is in this environment. So having a very visible crosswalk helps with that indication. The upper right, often we're walking or we're biking and we come across a driveway, and that slope of that driveway can be a tripping hazard, can kind of catch us off guard. And so driveways can be sloped in different to different extremes. And so just making note, trying to find the most level and sturdy surfaces as we're walking helps reduce the chance of falling. And then the lower right touches again on sidewalk width. So it's only necessary to have a 3-foot wide sidewalk, which is extremely narrow. And so as you're out and about, start noticing how wide you think sidewalks are. So this sidewalk here is a 6-foot width. It allows for someone in a wheelchair to comfortably use it. And I imagine someone could comfortably walk right next to them, or someone coming from the opposite direction could pass with ease. So just something to make note of as you're out and about. And similarly, again, some of us live in the county area, and some of the infrastructure looks a bit different. So even if there's a lack of a sidewalk, or maybe there's no bike lane, it's something to make note, because if this is an area that you like using, just making sure that you're using it as safely as possible. So making sure that you're facing traffic, trying to go at a time of day that you can be the most visible, because not all streets provide those infrastructure components. And lastly, on this part, this is few things that we see common and some things not. So this large pole is not a super common occurrence, but it does exist. And then the image on the right, we see cracks in sidewalks all the time. Oftentimes, again, sidewalks are adjacent to a private property. Maybe it was their responsibility to maintain these sidewalk areas. But understanding that there is a large concern for a tripping hazard, as well as just overall comfort in using this. And so making note of where situations like this are happening. Looking into behavioral issues. So sometimes the communities that we're sharing with others, their behaviors impact our experience. And so we see this a lot. The upper left, you have a car pulling out, and they're trying to see traffic coming by, but that results in them going into the sidewalk area. So it's always recommended to go behind the car versus in front, because as you can see, the gentleman in the blue shirt is being forced into the roadway, which is never a safe option. The lower left, we have cars that are, most of the time, they're trying to stay fixated on when it's their turn to go or stop. And so really paying attention to that signal, and maybe not always paying attention to who is in the crosswalk and when. And so it is our responsibility as a pedestrian and bicyclist to, unfortunately, always take a second or even a third look at crossing before we go, just because people are not always paying attention to us, which is unfortunate. And then the last thing that I'll add here is that the sidewalk space is public domain, but sometimes people treat it as their private use area. So if you're ever running into a situation where items are dumped or trash is left on the sidewalk, of course, that is something that we should avoid if possible, but also we can report that to make sure that the sidewalk stays as clear as possible. So the last area that I'd like to talk about in our environment is talking about traffic speed. Again, this could be in many places in San Diego, but roadways have evolved in several cases to really cater to a vehicle, and larger roadways lead to higher speeds. And so, what we like to do is kind of reverse that designs and understand that you can take kind of an existing roadway and what improvements can be made to slow down traffic, but also improve the experience of the pedestrian and bicyclist. So in this picture, it's the same exact picture. It's a little bit cut differently. So the van is on the left, a little bit further away than the one on the right. But you'll notice it's a little bit of figuring out kind of what the changes are. So just to point out a few, there's a center median. The sidewalk now has buffers with trees so that pedestrians are not right next to traffic. There are bike lanes. There's also a very clear left turn lanes. And so what this is doing is kind of constraining the roadway so that even though there's still the same number of driving lanes, it feels less of just a vehicular environment. It's now more of a shared use environment, which would allow for vehicles to kind of slow down, pay more attention to who else is sharing their environment with them. Here's one more example. I'm going to show you a series of pictures and you'll see how this environment kind of evolves to go from catering to mostly vehicles to catering to being a more complete street environment for everyone. So this is a first. You'll notice this person in the red shirt is crossing. There's no crosswalk. It's hard to tell if there's a signalized intersection. It doesn't appear there is. And also where this person is crossing to is an open lot. There's not a lot catering to what this environment can share or give to a bicyclist and pedestrian. Why would you be traveling here? So in this next involvement, there now are more businesses that evolve in what could be a mixed use. So maybe there's housing as well. Along the streetscape, there is lighting and trees. We now have a signalized intersection. And so there's a bit more attention given to everyone else sharing the space. And then in the next iteration, we have a great kind of visible crosswalk. We have more trees and a median. We have a pedestrian refuge. So in the middle, going all the way back to those large intersections that we were seeing. This allows that if you don't make that crossing signal in one time, you do have a safe place to rest until you can make the next phase. But I'll flip back just a few to see this is where we started. This is where we got to. So it really does become this complete environment for everyone. And the reason I share this is just understanding how we can design a space to make it feel safer and more comfortable for everybody. It's really kind of tremendous to look at what those differences are. So we talked about our environment, we talked about features there. Now I just want us all to think about how we, as a pedestrian or a bicyclist, can impact our own safety. So things to consider here are visibility, what we wear, how you prepare when you go out for a walk or a bike ride. So I'll go over a few of these items, but first thing to note, just from some of these pictures, is that the visibility of yourself. Again, we have a great privilege to be able to walk at all times of day, really, in San Diego because of our weather, but understanding that what you wear, how you prepare with the flashlight, and then also walking in a group makes us as visible as possible. So here's kind of one picture. I want you to take a look and guess how many pedestrians you can see. And I'll just kind of leave this up here for about 5 more seconds. So maybe you have a number in mind. Hopefully you saw 7. What this picture kind of shows us is that I would say number 4 is the most visible with that person's reflective vest. Number 7, you maybe saw this person's pants, but hard to see the top. And then several others, maybe you didn't see them at all. And so it just kind of goes to show how important what we wear and how we prepare for a walk is. And these next couple slides are just some reminders. So being aware that of driveways and blind spots when cars are backing up, this is one of the most vulnerable times for a pedestrian because the car can't see you. And so it really is up to us to kind of make that judgment of when it's safe to cross. Understanding where you are when you're crossing the street. So if you are crossing at a signalized intersection with one of these countdown timers, understanding how much time you have left. Maybe you should wait until the next phase versus rushing across and being caught with it counting all the way down. Staying alert and paying attention. This is certainly good advice for people of all ages. It's when you are in an intersection, you are at your most vulnerable point. And so put your phone away, put as many distractions away as possible, and really pay attention to what your surroundings are. And lastly, evaluate how you're feeling before you go out. So if you're extremely tired, maybe you're getting over an illness, these are important things to know because when you are not feeling your best, that means that you're also not as alert. And as much as I hate to put so much responsibility into the pedestrian and bicyclist, you are vulnerable compared to a vehicle on the roadway. So we want you to be as aware as possible. So just as a summary, kind of checklist of reminders. We want to be alert. We want to watch for backing vehicles. We want to be seen. We want to choose carefully where you walk, what your route is to be as safe. But I always like to say also comfortable. When you're out, I want you to have an enjoyable experience. Recognize how you're feeling and then report issues that you encounter. And this is where this kind of comes to how we can fix some of these problems as a community. So when it comes to speeding cars or cars failing to yield, this is a police issue. You can always try and report that when you are out walking, and that really helps kind of the benefit of your community to try and mitigate how much of that is happening. When it comes to signal timing or broken or blocked sidewalks, that's oftentimes a city matter, and many cities around the county have great apps that you can take a picture of a situation, mark exactly where it's happening, and send that. Maybe it's to Public Works or the Transportation Department, and they will go out and mark when it is fixed. So it's really kind of empowering to be the boots on the ground as a pedestrian or the cyclist to make these reports, because you most likely will see change fairly quickly, which is always satisfying. And of course, there's always a need for sidewalks, maybe in an area that is very pedestrian heavy. Maybe they don't have sidewalks, so that can always be brought up to city council. And then we're seeing more and more scooters, and I know that can sometimes be a disturbance, especially if there is riding on sidewalks, which scooter companies are trying to mitigate. But that's something that can be brought up directly with scooter companies. So that was kind of a quick dive into mobility for older adults, but also with that understanding that it is for everybody. And as kind of a major takeaway is we want everyone to feel safe. We want everyone to feel empowered and great to get out and get moving, however that may be. Maybe it's walking, maybe it's riding your bike, maybe it's rolling in a wheelchair, it's walking with a friend. And so we just want to make sure that our environment is as supportive as possible for that. So I will do a quick poll, um, just to see if you were able to learn anything new from today's lessons. Let me launch that. And as that is trickling in, I just want to prepare everyone that we will transition into a Q&A, and that will allow that if you have any lingering questions or you just want to bring up a comment, that would be terrific to hear back. So I will end the poll and close the slide. And welcome. Hi, everyone. And I just want to reiterate, thank you for being here. And I do see that there is a chat going. So what I can do is kind of look at these questions, and then it's a fairly small group today that you can go ahead and take yourself off mute if you have any lingering questions. But let me visit the chat first. Let's see. What can someone do if their neighborhood frontage zones are not well maintained? This is a great question. So, and I'll invite any of my colleagues, if you have items to chime in with, please feel free to do that. But again, oftentimes the frontage is a private business owner. And so what can be done is if you do feel comfortable, maybe it's a business versus a residence, going into the business and letting them know that you're a pedestrian that walks in front of this area and having that conversation. That's one way to go about it. Of course, if that doesn't feel as comfortable, or you don't feel safe doing that, you can always bring it up to a city, and code enforcement is also something that they can be involved to help facilitate that conversation. And I see another one about, has the pandemic impacted perceptions, discussions about adequate sidewalk widths? I would say the sidewalk width specifically, I haven't heard as much about, but the lack of sidewalks, absolutely. So people are definitely more attentive to where the sidewalks end, or maybe they just aren't there at all. I live in the La Mesa area, and very few communities out here have sidewalks, and that's been brought up a lot to city council. And I know that many cities are starting to, if they haven't already, do sidewalk improvement plans, and really trying to keep track of how their annual budgets can go more towards infrastructure like sidewalks and bike lanes as more people are using them and becoming far more vocal about the deficiencies that exist. So thank you for those. Those are the two that I see in the chat so far. So what I will do is, if anyone else has any other comments, feel free to take yourself off mute and we can answer those questions. I'll just kind of leave it open here for a few minutes. But if there are no other questions, I will just thank you for being here. And again, we'll have this recording available. We'll share it on our YouTube channel and on our website. But before we log off, I want to leave it open. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions?
I had a few comments / questions.
Yeah.
Hey, Jada.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. There were just, I guess there are more comments than anything. Some other thoughts on some of the items mentioned in the presentation. Right turns on red seems like something that definitely makes the pedestrian experience a little bit scarier, especially, you know, if you are, like you said, people who walk slower or struggle with coordination. I know sometimes cars kind of come in with doing a half stop at areas with right turns on red and are pretty much almost entirely in the pedestrian path at stoplights. And then another, I noticed you showed a picture of some of the barriers on sidewalks in neighborhoods, and it reminded me of North Parking, the thing that Andrew Bowen always posts about. Yeah, a lot of those apartment complexes that don't have, that people double park in, and it seems like it's an area where there should probably be citations issued, or at least conversations with building owners before they issue citations to kind of discourage that behavior. And then the last thought I had was kind of the intersection of our homeless crisis and this conversation, because we do have very narrow sidewalks in some parts, and there are so many people without homes that sometimes there is a conflict there, and it just drives home. Obviously, you know, them being without homes is reason enough, but there are also these side effects, and that's it.
Those are great comments, and to the point that, thank you for bringing all those up, because this is very much kind of an evolving conversation. Like every time I give this presentation, I add new slides based on feedback received, and so I think all three of those points are really valuable. Especially right hand turn. I mean, we've all have experienced that, and I think bring into the focus of having that, the lens of older adults or those who maybe perhaps move a little bit slower, but also it's intimidating for everyone to have a car pull out in front of you and coming into your walking zone. And yes, the conversation about North Park is a great example, but we are seeing that, or statistics show that cars backing up or kind of coming into that pedestrian zone area for older adults specifically is one of the most major threats that exists. And so I just want to thank you for bringing up all those points. They're really, really valuable, and I will take note of that. Brian, I see your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to know what Circulate's position is on mixing bicycle traffic on sidewalks with pedestrians.
Mm. Yeah. So we always, I'm going to speak for myself first. So as long as I've been at Circulate, we certainly like to separate our uses. So making sure that the pedestrians feel as safe and comfortable on the sidewalks, and bicycles and scooters do not belong in the sidewalk area. The caveat to that is I do understand that sometimes, depending on where you are, a sidewalk does feel the most comfortable. And that kind of comes into the different sort of bicycle facilities we could be offering. So oftentimes it's those who feel the most, maybe newer to biking, maybe it's biking with young children, or you just feel less comfortable biking in the roadway. And so people hop onto the sidewalk because that's where they feel safest. So I always want people to feel as safe as possible. But truth be told, sidewalks should be for pedestrians only. So I think we could just do a better job making sure that we provide safer and more expansive facilities for bicyclists and scooters to use separate from the sidewalk.
And I don't know, I agree with your opinion, and I don't know if Circulate has made a formal position, but we're seeing a lot of projects going on in the city of San Diego that are creating invitations to cyclists to ride on the sidewalk area at very, in my opinion, problematic locations, usually at junctions where, and I don't know if you're familiar with the terminology but there's a lot of pointing to other documents about bend outs and having sidewalk level cycle tracks right at the corner where you got to ramp up with the cyclist coming up, mixing with pedestrians, trying to make a decision about which crossing they're going to choose. And I really, like I said, I'm not a fan of it. I understand comfort. We have different laws in different cities within the region, so people don't even know whether it's illegal or not to ride on a sidewalk. So I guess I would like to see Circulate make a formal position on these types of projects.
Okay. No, absolutely. We'll make note of that. And thank you for bringing it up. It is a really important topic. And more so, that's something that we've seen highlighted by the pandemic, with so many more people utilizing sidewalk space. And now we have the integration of scooters as well as bicyclists, making sure that we do have separation of space and safe uses. So yeah, we will make note of that. Thank you for that, Brian.
No problem. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other comments during this lunch hour? I hope people are eating and snacking as this is happening.
Hi, this is Mar Gonzalez. I also work for another nonprofit, and I deal with a lot of family caregivers that are taking care of someone with dementia or Alzheimer's. Is there any additional things if they want to take their family member out for a walk, making sure they're safe? I mean, I know it's very hard to let them understand, and sometimes they don't want to follow EC guidelines, as in stay on the sidewalk or things like that. Is it safe? Should I recommend the caregivers to take these people out, or should I just tell them like it's not that safe for them just because they don't understand the concepts well? Or is there any other tools that you guys would recommend for them?
Yeah, very important topic. And thank you for that. I would say always recommending, if you are out and about, I know it would be best to be able to walk out your front door and enter onto a accessible wide sidewalk, but that's not always the case. And so if there is the availability if that's not an option, to go to a space that has better facilities so that you can walk a bit more comfortably and freely, that would be great. But if it is within walking distance that we're looking for, kind of going into those reminders of, if you are walking on a narrow street or a street in general, we always want to face traffic, because that way the driver can see us. But I would strongly recommend trying to find safer facilities being a sidewalk where you're not walking in the street, especially for those that maybe need a little bit more care as vulnerable users on the roadway. So that would just be my recommendation. Great. Any other questions? Yeah, Brian, go for it.
Yeah, I do have one more comment. You mentioned some of the sidewalk widths. I totally am in agreement with your opinion, and hopefully circulates formal opinion about sidewalks being primarily a pedestrian use facility. But I think you mentioned 36-inch clear passage and PROAG. I don't know if the term, the US Access Board, the public rights of way advisability guidelines, it's been in the making for more than a decade, unfortunately. But they're recommending 48-inch minimum. And then there's the whole passing condition. It's a 5 foot, I believe 5 foot minimum. So,
correct, yeah.
So I would say 36-inch is probably fine for building, based on the California building code, but also mostly for on-site conditions. And it's kind of a minimum condition. So I would suggest really promote the 5 foot, 4 foot min, but 5 foot really is the kind of I think of it as the lower threshold. And a lot of people don't understand whether you can include the top of the curb face. If you have a curbside sidewalk, really it doesn't include that top of the curb face condition, but some people might think it does. So, because we usually use curb face as our dimension point for measuring sidewalks rather than from the back curb. So anyway, just a comment. I'm a proponent of pedestrian environment, and I don't like to see it compromised by mixed uses.
No, thanks for your comment. And yeah, I agree. The top of curb, 4-inch is what the width of a curb is that we should be measuring from back of curb. And so total, the minimum would be 3 foot 4 inches if you're counting that top of curb. But I'm totally with you that I think 5 inches, or I'm sorry, 5 feet, truthfully, from my perspective, should be a minimum, and 6 feet or beyond would be great, especially as we are looking. There are more mixed uses out there, regardless of how we all feel about it. But with the restaurants moving into the sidewalk space, with if we want trees, if we want mailboxes, whatever the case is, so a wider sidewalk allowing for a clear thoroughfare would be ideal.
Agreed.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah, these are great comments, and we have time for one more, but I just wanted to reiterate that this is everything that we present on in these workshops. They're things that we love working on and feel really proud of, but we are not too good to like update our presentation. So all of this feedback is really appreciated. I'll bring it back to my team, both the planning side, policy side, we all work together. So thank you for all of these comments. Is there any lingering questions that I can help address? Okay. Well, last thing I see is that Mar, I see that you requesting the presentation. I can absolutely, anyone who's interested, Angelica could just put my email in there. Feel free to email me and I can share this with you, as well as share out the recording. But thank you again for attending. And we have 2 other Mobility Monday workshops coming up. So if they're not on your calendar already, please add them, and we look forward to seeing you then. But thank you so much for joining us.